According to the world's chemical weapons watchdog, Syria has completed the handover of an inventory of its chemical weapons arsenal by the deadline that was set to stave off military strikes. What does this really mean, and can it be trusted? Then there's the question of how to destroy this arsenal. The US-Russian disarmament agreement, hammered out as the US threatened military action in response to the August chemical attack outside Damascus, demands that Syria hand over the whole of its arsenal, which is to be destroyed by mid-2014. And to help us understand whether this deal could possibly work, I'm joined by Joseph Siracusa, Professor in Human Security and International Diplomacy at Melbourne's RMIT, who's in our Melbourne studio, and also David Smith, Lecturer in American Politics and Foreign Policy at the US Studies Centre at the University of Sydney. Welcome to you both. Now, if I could start with, let's have a look at this terrorist attack in Nairobi, the Al-Qaeda-linked group Al-Shabaab. Professor Siracusa, what can you tell us about this, and how potentially lethal are they?
Oh, they're very lethal in the Horn of Africa area. They are paying back Kenya for its intervention into Somalia in 2011. Kenya's become very vulnerable since then. I mean, they knew their population would be vulnerable, and this is payback time. And they did it in very grand fashion. I mean, they got a 24/7 news cycle for 2 days. They got to advance their cause, and I think they're one of the leaders now in Terrorism, Inc.
Professor Siracusa, why now? Why this attack? There is some suggestion that there is some internal power struggle going on in Al-Shabaab, and that maybe this was to try and say, oh, you know, we're very tough.
Well, I'm sure there's a power struggle going on. I mean, they're a querulous bunch of people, and in fact, even though they started out as offering themselves to Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda didn't quite know what to do with them because they kept arguing among each other. If there's a power struggle, we'll never know about it. But we do know, of course, is that there have been a number of incremental attacks on Kenya over the last year and a half, and that this is the promised one. And I think we have to take them as very serious players in the region.
Yeah, David Smith, how linked to Al-Qaeda are they? And as far as we know, are they jihadists?
They are like a lot of organisations that we see proliferating all the way from sub-Saharan Africa to Central Asia. They are part jihadist, part protection racket. And this is why it's so difficult to defeat them. They are powerful in regions where there is really no central state, in this case rural Somalia outside of the capital. In that part of Somalia, they probably are the economy, so they have some kind of minimal level of support within the population there because they're the only source of income. And we see this pattern all the way from Kenya to Pakistan, where, I mean, the group that carried out an attack on a church in Pakistan on Sunday, killing 81 people. This is the same sort of thing coming out of the same kind of stateless region, in this case in Peshawar. So yes, part jihadist, but part protection racket, and very, very difficult to defeat.
David Smith, well, that's right. The question remains, how can the West, how can any country, Kenya included, possibly beat these cells, these groups that just strike wherever and strike so hard?
The only thing that can ever defeat these groups in the long term would be if there is a central government established that has some semblance of power, and if there's economic development. But it's very hard to see that.
You mean in Somalia?
In Somalia or in Pakistan or wherever else, in Yemen, wherever else these kind of groups proliferate, but it's very hard to see that ever happening in the first place because there's so much insecurity there that benefits these groups that it's very hard to see basic government services ever being established in parts of Somalia that this group controls.
Yeah, Professor Siracusa, does the eyes of the world, it certainly had been on Syria, did that sort of make it a perfect time to strike in Kenya?
Well, I think so. I mean, there was a bit of a lull. I mean, we're trying to get a settlement of some kind over Syria's chemical weapons. We're trying to get a settlement of some kind over Iranian nuclear energy, and maybe this is a lull that they took advantage of. These guys, they don't always coordinate with each other, but they chime in from time to time, and I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't take advantage of this lull. And it's very, I think it's disheartening that we're taking our eye off the ball in Iran and the Syrian chemical deal, because that's where the real action is. That's the important stuff. This shopping mall is a disaster. and it just takes our eye off the ball. But I think there was some timing there, and I think it was pretty much their decision.
All right, well, on Syria, Professor, what do we really know of this plan, and how can we trust that Syria will meet the commitment that they're supposed to meet?
Well, I support this this diplomacy for Syria because it's the last effort before we have to use force, and the president has promised force. He's taken force off the table while the Syrians have a chance to think about coughing up their weapons. My only disappointment is they can cough up their weapons and no one will be held accountable for the massacre of the 1,400 people. So in a sense, I'm only half pleased with this arrangement. But I think it has a pretty good chance of forcing the Syrians at least to negotiate seriously. If they start lying to the West, if they start lying to the chemical inspectors, I think Russia will be forced to dump them and then have to put up with some kind of resolution in the UN Security Council. So I think it's an important exercise. I hope it works.
David Smith?
I believe that the only thing that Assad will respond to at this point from outside is a Russian threat to withdraw support. Assad, he is in this conflict until he either prevails completely or he's dead. So the threat of a Western attack, the threat of an American attack, that never worried Assad. That's why he was prepared to push the boundaries on chemical weapons. He knows as well as Barack Obama does that the US is not capable of the kind of surgical strike that would hurt him but not hurt his opposition.
Well, from what you're saying then, he has no intention of really committing genuinely to this plan to disarm.
No, I think he will commit to the plan to disarm chemical weapons, because if the price that he pays for retaining power in Syria and retaining Russian patronage is giving up one part of his arsenal of weapons, a part that is only responsible for about 1% of the deaths in this war, a part that he does not need to actually win this war, then that's a price that he is completely willing to pay.
And do we know that that will be something that he will gain, meaning he will gain the upper hand if he gives this small part, as you call it, of his arsenal over?
I believe that if he cooperates with the Russians, he will retain the upper hand. He already has the upper hand.
But sorry, are you saying that it will be some deal done, or will he just keep fighting and keep being armed?
Every indication seems to be at the moment that what the Russians actually want from the Americans is a commitment that once Assad gives up his chemical arsenal, then there won't be any further threats of military action from the United States. So at the moment, it appears that the deal is that if Assad gives up his chemical weapons, then he will continue to enjoy Russian protection and he'll probably be able to ride out this civil war without the threat of American military intervention.
So does that mean that the Americans, by forcing this, are actually giving in to Assad staying in power?
Well, I think they are acquiescing to that, but I think they never had any intention of doing anything different. I mean, Obama always tried to make this about chemical weapons. Even when he gave a speech in support of military intervention in Syria on the chemical weapons issue, he made it clear that there was no other reason why the United States wanted to get involved. That yes, they know that horrific abuses are going on, but they know that they cannot fix it with military action. And this is a retreat from the stance that the United States would have taken 10 years ago, Obama explicitly saying, we are not the world's policemen. I think that the American people have no appetite for getting involved in another country's civil war. I think that Obama doesn't. I think that the only reason why Obama ever put military action on the table was to maintain the kind of credibility of his own threats after he had drawn this red line of chemical weapons a year earlier. So I think that the United States is essentially going to accept this Russian brokered deal. I think that Assad will accept it, and I think that the likely outcome is Syria will surrender its chemical weapons in good faith, and that will allow Assad to retain power.
Professor Siracusa, what do you think of that sort of line of thinking that, in fact, in the end, even if we get rid of Syria's chemical weapons, Assad retains power?
Well, I think Assad is going to be around a long time. The President of the United States has a stake in the region, but he doesn't have a dog in the fight. I mean, Assad is supported by Hezbollah and Iran, and it is a client state of Russia, so Russia is going to protect it one way or the other. The rebels are rebels we don't much know, or they're al-Qaeda-aligned rebels, so we're quite reluctant to get too involved with them. I think, in a sense, and I'm going to agree with David, I think Assad is pretty much winning and will win the war in Syria. There's not much we can do about that. But what we're looking for now is maybe a ceremonial or a symbolic coughing up of these weapons. I mean, we have to save face here. I must say that in the last couple of weeks, President Putin has outmaneuvered President Obama greatly on this thing, and the Russians are terrific poker players, or I should say chess players.
Yeah. David Smith, just in sort of summary, do you think President Obama has been snookered or outpokered on this, and has it damaged him as a president?
I think that Obama is grateful to have been outmanoeuvred. It was actually Russia that gave him the lifeline.
Meaning he did not want the military strikes,
no,
really.
you could tell he didn't want the military strikes because he was going to Congress to ask for authorisation. And if Congress wouldn't authorise anything else he's done, there was no reason they were going to authorise this. Russia knew that it would actually be helping Obama by giving him this exit. So this is not a situation Obama wanted to be in the first place. I would say he would have been quite happy to be outmanoeuvred in this situation.
All right, and just very briefly, if he agrees to this, does that mean he stays out of Syria and lets Assad win?
I believe that he will, yes.
All right, gentlemen, on that very depressing note, we will leave it at that. David Smith and Professor Joseph Siracusa from RMIT and David Smith from US Studies Centre, Sydney University, thank you.